Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Watchmen. We're just a couple of dudes sitting on the wall, watching the world go by, making some observation on current events as related to Bible prophecy. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Checkmate. How's it going this evening, Checkmate?
Oh, it's going very well, Paul. Good to be back. I know we took about a weekend hiatus from our usual production, and we're back in the saddle.
And it looks like we've had a very busy week in review. We're going to start in Israel, north of Jerusalem, at Joseph's tomb in the West Bank in Nablus. And this is a tweet from the Israel Defense Forces. Joseph's tomb is a heritage site sacred to Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Palestinian writers vandalized and set fire to the tomb last night. And their point is a religious site should never be a place of violence. And it is the holy month of Ramadan for Islam. Historically, that means this is a license to go do some things, tear some stuff up from the religion of peace. And I think a lot of this is in response to what we're seeing with the Israeli government. We're going to get to that in a second, but just as a concept, I'm not going to read all of this, but Jesus talked about a house divided. And clearly, that's what we're seeing in the Israeli government. Now, Jesus, of course, is looking at verse 23. So Jesus called them together and began to speak to them in parables. How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, it cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, it cannot stand. So, in verse 27 speaks to a lot of what's going on around the planet. Indeed, no one can enter a strong man's house to steal his possessions unless he first ties up the strong man. And man, we've got all kinds of countries tying up their strong man and opening the door and allowing bad things to come in and allow for some theft. And I think we're in, Israel's having that same thing happen within their government. And I know also, as we talked about this before, I know you had some thoughts relative to what's going on with the Israeli government in light of Revelation 2, verse 9, and I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. This is something that on Fighting Checkmates I've hit upon before, and that is that Revelation 2:9 is a really good tie-in to, I think, what we're seeing in Israel. And there's the third overlay of the prophecy that Kim Clement brought forward that is referred to as the Trump prophecy. It was in 2014, February of 2014 is when he laid that one down. It's famous. It's really gone viral. But Revelation 2:9, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. And the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Israel having been called back together, and it was done so in one day, as was put forward in Scripture. It was done in one day, but it was done with people who had gone to different parts of the world. Obviously, it is still a work in progress that the Jews are repatriating, but it has created a system of government where all of these patchworks really haven't homogenously made one return to the Lord. And so when this particular government formed, it formed in response to the toppling of Netanyahu. And it is, I'll use very charitable words that one of my Israeli friends uses, a transitional government. And I've got a little note from him that I will read off in just a moment. It's a short one. But maybe if we go ahead and sort of step to the next item, Paul. I'll let you jump in here and then I'll come back.
Sure. And this is from Axios. And this previous week, Israeli government is on the brink of collapse after a key lawmaker quits Bennett's coalition. And, the headline is the Israeli government lost its majority in the Knesset on Wednesday when the coalition whip from Prime Minister Bennett's Yamina party announced she was joining the opposition. So, I mean, he's got division within his own his own party, let alone the coalition of the government. And when these things happen, um, actors in the region are going to smell weakness, and they're going to do things to test that weakness. They're going to try to divide it even further. And I think we're seeing that with some of the terrorism attacks that have taken place over the last couple of weeks. In Tel Aviv, one lone person with a gun went around shooting up people in restaurants and bars, and that division will be tested, and I expect it will continue. And
This and this particular item in Times of Israel that you're showing now, I sort of checked in with my friends who are security watchers of the region there, and what was written back to me was this is the third terror attempt today. Gush et Zion, Hebron, and Ashkelon. So far, 2 terrorists have been shot dead in the attempts. One Israeli soldier lightly wounded, and that was the one in Hebron. And 1 terrorist wounded. Meanwhile, the manhunts and sporadic encounters continue in the Jenin area between PLO, Fatah, terrorists, and the IDF, mostly surrounding attempts to arrest accomplices and family of the Tel Aviv terrorists 2 days ago. This violence has been simmering, and it's been serious enough that the government had put out a statement last week that if anybody has a license to carry a firearm, they should do so. And so with respect to the coalition government, I had related to friends of mine in that area that a little bit of gallows humor, and I'll actually read exactly what I said when they said that's it, the governing party's finished, and I wrote, wow, that went quicker than I thought. God still loves his covenant people, and of course that's my, having, been in that region, that's my gallows tongue in cheek. And what was written back to me was, seriously, this was a transitional government that had few issues internal to Israel on which it could get things done, and over which its members were in consensus, such as religious rabbinate reform and other important internal issues. When the U.S. started pushing the Palestinian issue and indulging in their ambitions, such as a consulate in Jerusalem, and when Defense Minister Gantz played U.S. waterboy, as it always does, it only whetted the Palestinians' appetite and fueled violence. So we have a little culpability in there in terms of our position or non-position, because the fact of the matter is that the people who are running the Israel policy right now, between the State Department and to a lesser extent the Defense Department, they're stuck on the Palestinian issue. They're completely stuck on it. And the Abraham Accords was supposed to neutralize that as being a prime mover of U.S. policy. And so this is the bureaucracy returning to type. Where the government is concerned and the Kim Clement prophecy is concerned, I'll very quickly run back to people who read Fighting Checkmates on ValorTube. What I run back to is that this coalition was formed in response to deposing Bibi Netanyahu, who was really taken out of power in a political scandal involving freelance signals intercept technology from an organization called NSO Group. And NSO Group is a computer security company in Israel. They had a piece of spyware called Pegasus, and it was utilized by corrupt cops to put Netanyahu into a fake scandal. All of that sounds very familiar to anybody who voted for Donald Trump and saw what happened in 2016 and 2020. And so the Kim Clement tie-in comes back to where Kim brings the word, I will accomplish in America what I do in Israel at the same time, words to that effect. So we're seeing crisis of government in both places, and I'll leave the Kim Clement prophecy from 2014 there, other than to say the two governments are facing twin crises in lockstep, where the governments are both really pretty incoherent, and it's whetting the appetites of our enemies. Done.
So needless to say, if you look at the craziness of what we're watching with our own government, we're going to see probably more of the same thing take place in Israel, and it's always fascinating because we got the the spring feast coming up in less than a week with Passover, and
15.
historically, big ticket items happen during Passover. And with that, we're going to transition out of Israel, and we're going to take a look at what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time in regards to the logistics of what's taken place in Ukraine, but some of the ripple effects we're starting to see happen as a result. We're going on 6 weeks of this. This is from the Ministry of Defense out of the UK. Their comment: the illegal and unprovoked invasion of Ukraine is continuing, and the map below is the latest defense intelligence update on the situation in Ukraine. That's as of today, April 10, 2022. And so effectively, you've got collectively, you got forces in the north and in the kind of withdrawing, regrouping, etc. And Russia is effectively focusing its efforts in the far eastern part of Ukraine. I didn't know if there are any other thoughts that you had on this in regards to what's taking place in Ukraine.
Well, we're going to segue into the food issue, but what I would say about Ukraine is it seems like Zelensky is actually getting his head about him in terms of looking for a peaceful resolution. He's looking to negotiate seriously. I think he's made his peace with the idea of getting Crimea back again. Probably is not going to happen. You'd have to look at a complete collapse of the Russian army and navy for that to happen. And Donetsk and Luhansk in the Donbass region of the extreme eastern Ukraine, they're likely also going to be at least semi-autonomous regions. Is probably going to be a little more evolved than that. But the fact of the matter is that I would say that the West is truly culpable in attempting to prolong the agony of this, and it is already taking a bite out of not just food prices, but the attendant inflation that comes with it.
And that's what we're going to get into with the inflation. I'm going to back out here with the map and go a little bit north into Ukraine, and some of the video coming out of these port cities like Mariupol. I mean, that place has been absolutely destroyed. These port cities and the Sea of Azov have just been utterly, you can't even recognize it. There's just no way, even if you could harvest the crops and get them to the port, there's no port to distribute the goods from. And
Yeah,
that's
you're not getting them out there, and that's the point of the Russian campaign at this point, is to make the key nodes of Ukraine that they have no intention of hanging on to as economically enfeebled as possible. And that's really, the Russians have changed their thinking, is that they want to knock Ukraine down a couple of pegs in terms of its ability to ever be a threat to it in the next 10, 15 years. And they're succeeding by the Scorched Earth campaign.
Well, what was it I saw today too, that there's starting to be estimates coming out of Ukraine that their economy is going to take a 45 to 50% hit this year because of that. And you can see, just south of the Black Sea is Turkey. And so, we pivot to Turkey. This is out of L Monitor. Turkey inflation hits 61% as fallout from Ukraine war continues. Consumer inflation has surged to a fresh 2-decade high. In Turkey, external headwinds spawned by Russia's invasion of Ukraine add to the country's own economic woes. And the crazy thing about that, so, not only is the consumer getting gouged to the tune of 61%, producer prices, those are also, so annual producer inflation is up nearly 115%. I saw in one particular report as high as 160%. Some of the estimates were. So it is costing, effectively 2.5 times to produce goods as what it cost a year ago. And this is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better, and especially with all the things that are taking place north of Turkey. And I didn't know if did you have any thoughts or any comments in regards to the economic impact on Turkey?
Well, in terms of Turkey, no, I think that Erdogan now has such a strong hold on Turkey politically. It's going to be really hard to knock him out of the box because the traditional guarantor that the Turkish government works is the military, and its ranks have been so heavily Islamicized. It's kind of a shadow of the professional army that we used to know, and we used to have. The United States used to have a wonderful, robust working relationship with the Turks. I mean, fought hard, knew what they were doing, and all of that was gotten rid of in favor of loyalty to Erdogan. What I would say about the economic picture is that this food crisis goes a little bit further than just Turkey, of course, as you know, Paul, because we've talked about it here in this forum. Is Israel right now? The cost of eggs and grain has gone up because of this situation as a direct consequence. Same thing in Egypt, which gets very serious. I mean, this really has the Egyptians' attention. Likewise, through North Africa, we will certainly see. I think that in Libya, or Put, as it is referred to in Ezekiel, they probably will get some sort of favorable bilateral uh, trade with Russian grain just because the Russians are there in such a footprint. And the government of Moscow will make sure to remind the Libyans that this is from their friends in Russia.
Well, I think your comments, because I think last week I'd read Israel is no longer receiving any grain shipments from Ukraine or Russia, so they are now looking for other sources. Egypt, you had mentioned, receives 80 to 85% of all of its grain from Russia and Ukraine. So I mean, some of these places are really going to be scrambling. And then you go just north of Israel. We've talked about this on many occasions. They had the big explosion in their port, took out a whole bunch of their grains a little over a year ago, and the Lebanese lira has been in free fall. Well, now you've got earlier this week, the Lebanese central bank as well as the Lebanese government have announced they are bankrupt, and so now they're reaching out to different sources. Hey, we need some money, including the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. They're trying to get, I think, what was it, a $3 billion loan to help pay some of the bills, whether it's for food, medicine, just basic provisions throughout Lebanon. And of course, there's arguments within, oh no, we're bankrupt. Oh no, we're not bankrupt. But the bottom line is, this country is hurting. And this is, just as a reminder, this is on Israel's northern border along with Syria. And historically, the way things have gone recently, Lebanon, in effect, kind of de facto run by Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy, they've got their hands in that. We're going to speak a lot about Iran coming up here in the last part of this segment. But you can see how, with Ezekiel 38 and 39, with Russia and Iran, and then the knock-on effects of what happens because of choices made by these two countries, how this is rounding into a time that is right in Ezekiel's wheelhouse. Did you have any thoughts or comments on Lebanon?
I think you hit it pretty well. The Lebanese, in addition to hosting such a militarily significant contingent of Hezbollah in the extreme south of the country, the fact is that since the Lebanese civil war, the Syrians have been stealing everything they can from Lebanon itself. The Assad government, formerly Hafez al-Assad, the current dictator's father, has had his hands in Beirut for a very long time, and really just sort of in absentia, kind of sort of called the shots in Lebanon. The population sometimes is a little too restive to be responsive to just one party. But the fact of the matter is that hard times in Syria, hard times in Lebanon. The only people who've had any money in recent times who've been in there are the Russians and the Iranians. Again, we're looking at the Iranians potentially having a great deal more dough in the future. Yeah, I think he basically hit it. And we're looking at the same players from Ezekiel 38 and 39 that we've talked about.
Well, I think your comments too, speaking toward the southern part of of Lebanon, So J. Vernon McGee, some of you folks who are listening to this may be familiar with the Bible teacher J. Vernon McGee from the 50s and 60s. He's from Oklahoma, but he had made the comment in some of his teachings. He was discussing Tyre and Sidon. He says, well, my friends, when you see Tyre and Sidon in the news, and at some point they will be again, he says, that's when you know Jesus is near. And I mean, and this is the area, as you can see here on the map. This is southern Lebanon. This is exactly what Checkmate was talking about. And these are important port cities. Here we, sit today in 2022. And, here's a guy speaking about this 50 to 60 years ago. And I mean, this is just a man studying the Bible, read the Bible, believed it, and made some comments on that. And sure enough, here we are 70 years later. We're living these things. It's over the top. And we're going to transition from out of the, Eastern Europe, Turkey, Israel, the Holy Land, and we're going to make a move over here to China. And we're going to take a specific look at Shanghai. Meanwhile, this is going on. This is from Andy Lin. I'm not familiar. He's a data reporter, Financial Times. I think that's correct, covering politics, markets, and business in Asia. And so they are currently in the throes of a COVID outbreak. Granted, this is a milder version of Omicron, but nonetheless, China has a zero tolerance policy, and we're gonna quarantine it and crush it. It's having no effect, following the same curve of Hong Kong's latest outbreak. But the thing that's happened with this is they've quarantined 25 million people, and now these people are hungry. And as of today, they had decided, you know what? We're not going to stay in this. And so they're leaving their houses, and then they are now going and looting grocery stores. So they have no access to medical services, foods. Families have been separated by the quarantine. How long will it last? Well, the natives are getting restless in Shanghai. And I'm going to turn this over to you, Checkmate. I mean, we talked about some of this briefly about just the logistics of what Shanghai means to supply and distribution chains around the world.
Well, Shanghai is probably the largest single logistics operation in the world if you consider the entire canton and the city itself with its portage. It's probably the largest single logistics operation in the world. The area of Shanghai is Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Basin times 3. In terms of population, its geographic area is actually quite large. And one of the issues that we really ought to keep a good eye on, especially as people begin speaking more and more about Taiwan and the possibility of a conflagration there, is that there is a People's Congress, which really is just the bigwigs of the Chinese Communist Party getting together here towards the end of the year. And President Xi's performance is going to be up for review, if you will. And even though he at one point was referred to as president for life, he is also president only for life, if you follow my drift. And one of the things that that the Chinese have as a continual concern of theirs, and one that is shared by security planners in the United States, is what they refer to as factors of instability, that they can't afford to let anything on the mainland get too out of hand economically or socially. Hence their rather all-consuming need to have information on nearly every person in the country, is to keep a good eye on that. But more to the point, something like what you're seeing here is exactly the kind of thing that the Chinese, we had always considered, and we had actually war-gamed out, literally, was that something like this might start, and that might prompt China to act outwardly. I disagree. I think that the knowing that the United States has had special operations in Taiwan for the past 6 years, teaching the Taiwanese how to fight the Chinese once they're already on the beach and having established supply points. I think they're taking a good look at Ukraine and watching what just a couple of handfuls compared to the Russian army are doing to top-the-line Russian equipment. in the hands of people who've been trained by the United States and dedicated to the defense. On top, and so I think they're thinking twice about this. But the embarrassment of what is going on, you have people very willfully going out into the streets and screaming at the police about not having food. It's getting to be such an embarrassing scene. I get the feeling that there's probably a great deal of debate and consternation within the Communist Party. There is a good website called China Vitae that watches the comings and goings of the Chinese leadership. And if you bother to study it long enough, you'll actually see that it looks like the factions are beginning to bicker with each other just by who's seen with whom and who's doing what with whom. So I think actually, given the shortage of food and resources in the world and the continuing cost of inflation to other currencies, and the yuan is already on hard times right now as a currency, I think the Chinese might be reassessing any plans they had formulated with Putin with respect to you take Ukraine, we take to Taiwan, we watch each other's backs.
You bring up an interesting point in regards to the currencies too. And so I don't know how many folks followed this last week, but Putin effectively tied the ruble to the spot price of gold. And Central Bank of Russia has been buying physical gold to back its currency. And I think that's going to, the ripple effects of that, we have yet to fully understand. They're going to tie that to commodity prices. And if you've got the grain and the natural gas and the oil, and you've tied that to the spot price of gold, that's going to make for a very interesting economic environment moving forward. And with that, we're going to go back to Iran. This was out of Checkmate. You'd found this one from France24.com, and this goes back to the Iran nuclear talks.
Yeah, that's right. The Iran nuclear talks. I think the last time we did one of these, you and I had been talking, and with certainty, I have egg on my face. I have to apologize for, but it looked like it was a done deal. That it was just going to happen, and that the Iranians were going to get everything that they had asked for. And I think that because there is so much going on between Ukraine, the president's mental condition, the new surge, quote unquote, of COVID, that the Iran nuclear deal went from being a quiet backroom arrangement to Democrats quietly going to their bosses and saying, it's going to be bad for us in November. It's going to be worse if you do this, especially with the delisting of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The Iranian government, they've really overreached on the subject of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. But even in spite of this, what's happened in the past 72 hours is that the administration still appears to be open to doing a deal. And the Iranians right now are sort of climbing down, but they're trying to do it while saving face, which means their comments, such as the one you see here, are going to get a touch more caustic. It is not made better. It is not made better by the fact that two gentlemen were arrested this past week, and they were arraigned in federal court. And I posted this on Fighting Checkmates. This is And Magazine, which is run by a former CIA case officer named Sam Faddis. And Sam is he's one of the old time cowboys of the CIA. He is exactly the kind of person you wish was running the CIA. As it stands now, it's a bunch of millennials and Gen Zers, soy sippers, as I call them. But Sam actually has a very lucid grip on everything from operations all the way up to strategic world politics. And he lays out that these men who were arrested impersonating Homeland Security agents, and they had befriended members of the Secret Service. They had gotten to the point to where gifts were coming to the Secret Service guys. Apartments were being used by the Secret Service that these people had surveillance equipment in. And then some of the equipment that these people were in possession of. And the fact that in court they said they had a relationship with the Pakistani Inter-Services Intelligence Organization, which runs, for all intents and purposes, Pakistan, but cooperates with the Iranian government on certain critical issues. They collaborate. And I'll tie this back here very shortly to Iran. Well, I'll just go ahead and do it now. Iran, even though we don't have diplomatic, we don't have direct diplomatic relations with the Iranians, we do have them through Pakistan. Pakistan is what is referred to as the protecting power for Iran. So where you see a Pakistani facility in the United States that is diplomatic in nature, be it the embassy in Washington, D.C., or a consulate, you can be assured there is at least one Iranian security service officer that is in there who is accredited as a Pakistani diplomat. So these two men got arrested, and it threw the IRGC issue being a part of the agreement back into focus. But it also threw the Pakistani government into a bad light. And Mr. Segway strikes again. I put it back to you, Paul.
And then we had this take place. I'm going to get this rolling. This is out of holy cow! I need to mute that. This is in Pakistan. Former Prime Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan received a vote of no confidence this week, and he's been effectively ousted. And so, which speaks to what we were just listening Checkmate talk about. You've probably got some Iranian tentacles taking place with some of this. Now they're wanting, there's some debate as to whether, what caused this, whether the United States had a finger in this, but you have the former prime minister of Pakistan, and the people are speaking, and this is tonight. I mean, this is taking place as we speak. And if you get on Twitter, if you get on Twitter and just pull up Pakistan, holy cow. I mean, there is picture after picture, video after video, just like this, showing hundreds of thousands of people protesting what's happened.
And like Israel, the U.S. press is just not even touching this. And, this is a very fractious country that does have a lot of Islamic extremism in them. And by the way, they have nuclear weapons too.
And this is from this is a tweet from the former prime minister. This is from Khan himself. And I know you'd spoken about it, for those wanting to get a feel about the recent history, BBC News put out a note, an article, Imran Khan, what led to the charismatic Pakistan prime minister's downfall. And I know you know more about this guy than I do, and I'll defer to you on this.
He was an immensely popular fellow, but like everybody who rises to power in Pakistan, you have to do business with the Pakistani security services. They, for all intents and purposes, run the place. They are a state within a state. If you thought we had a bad deep state, theirs is significantly worse. That said, it is what it is. The Pakistani ISI, if you want to boil it down to one single actor that ran us out of Afghanistan in such an embarrassing way, it's them. I used to call it the Hamid Gul wing of the Pakistani Inter Services Intelligence, even though he's since passed on. He very much believed in the deep state and that a prime minister or a president was merely an ornament on the state. And so I thought, if you wanted to get a good 30,000-foot look at the article about, how did this suddenly happen? It had actually been boiling for a little while, and this article does a pretty fair job of laying that out.
Yeah, and I think that also, I'll comment on that after we go to this, because there's all kinds of, when these types of things happen, the rumor mill and the finger pointing are crazy. And there are people out there who are saying, well, the United States wanted a regime change. And then some say, oh, no, that had nothing to do with it. And then Checkmate had found this article.
Yeah, this is Dawn newspaper. Pakistan and India, one of the things about both countries is, of course, they used to be one, but they have the English language tradition owing to the British involvement in the two countries, and they're reluctant to part company with it. The way that the British brought bureaucratic understandings of the way countries ought to be run is something that they hang on to, as they do the English tradition. And so there's a newspaper in Pakistan that's worth reading if you care to keep up with this part of the world, called Dawn. And this was in it about Imran Khan making repeated comments that he had been threatened by the Assistant Secretary of State for Central Asia and South Asia, a fellow named Donald Liu, who I used to be acquainted with professionally, that he'd been threatened with a regime change. He's continually pushing this. This is not something the United States really needs, regardless of the truth value, is to hear that we are pushing for yet another color revolution in another part of the world. And so I thought that if somebody wanted what could very well turn into a heavily aggravating view of this episode and where the Pakistani view of the United States is, this article in Dawn newspaper does a pretty good job of laying out the issue.
And I think all of these things, and I'll take this back up to Ezekiel 38, and why do we pay attention to these types of things? And you touched on this the last time we were together, specifically verse 6, as well as Gomer with all its troops and Beth Dagarma from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. All of these countries, Iran has its proxies, they're bringing along. Russia has its proxies, they're bringing along. And I'm sure there will be, support from some of the North African countries that may agree with what Libya has to say or what the Sudan has to say. And so it's more than just, it's going to be a massive coalition of many nations. And that's one of the things that's become really evident to me that I hadn't taken into much consideration. I always, Russia, Russia, Russia. Well, guess what? Iran has plenty of friends it's bringing along and getting involvement.
That's exactly right. Because it itself is an ethnic hodgepodge. You have ethnic Azeris, you have ethnic Armenians, you have ethnic Baluch, and Pakistan, I think, has the largest Shiite Muslim population outside of Iran within its borders. And if there is an eroding security situation in Pakistan and you've got to find a way to get rid of the young men, what better way than to say, hey, do you want to go volunteer to serve with the Iranians on their great military crusade? Good luck, get out of here. And that's, the Saudis did that in the 1980s with the war in Afghanistan, as they just got rid of the angry young men by sending them to battle.
And you can see how all of these countries, here they are, Iran, Pakistan, we had the mess in Afghanistan. And then you have Libya here, Sudan to the south. All of this is going to come against Israel at some point. And then you look at some of the coalitions that Russia has forged with Georgia. And I know you had sent me a note in regards to what was taking place in Azerbaijan and Armenia here in the south. Russia's
diplomatic relations restored. Yeah,
they've got their fingers.
Kind of a big deal.
Absolutely, because they got into that little scrap started up about a year and a half ago, and I think that was during the fall feast, if I remember correct, over on the Day of Atonement.
I believe it was around that time, yes. And the Turks took up sides with Azerbaijan.
That's right.
And Armenia, of course, hosts a Russian garrison and Air Force squadron. I think that the two of them talking serves the dual purposes of Russia and Turkey.
Well, and then the crazy part of that, this was quiet. Turkey and Armenia are reaching out to each other, kind of both offering olive branches apiece, which I'm just like, oh, come on, you're kidding me. And then I saw, what was it, down here in South Ossetia, those folks are looking to become part of Russia. I saw something this week regarding that. So you can see how this whole area is coalescing, if you will. And I'm still waiting on some pieces of some things to come together in regards to the Iranians, the Turks, and the Russians. Who knows how that will happen? We know it's going to happen, and what the twists and turns of how that happens will probably be off the charts crazy. It's like, oh, you're kidding me. That's how this came together? Well, it will happen. And the question is when.
Yeah, I've developed since I've become a charismatic Christian, and I've been a watcher of modern Rhema word as it's been coming out, and having an evolving understanding and progressive illumination of through progressive illumination of Ezekiel 38 and 39. I have learned the lesson, and I should apply it a little more readily to my prognostications about world affairs. But don't get ahead of the Holy Spirit; you'll just humiliate yourself.
Well,
So,
I'll tell you who's taught me that lesson, and that is one Recep Erdogan out of Turkey.
yeah,
That guy,
exactly.
I've learned so many hard lessons because of his twists and turns, and it seems like, okay, we're on course for this to happen, and then he does something that just throws a monkey wrench in everything, and it's like, okay, I'll sit back and watch. I
Yeah,
gotcha.
he's the wily coyote of the international scene. He's blowing himself up, but he never dies. So
Well, well, in the way, the whole world is raising interest rates to fight inflation. Not Erdogan. Nope, we're gonna we're gonna lower them, and it
that's right.
keeps making the situation worse. And then you throw a war north of him, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're kidding. But dude, and like you said, dude's still in power, and if anything, his position has been getting stronger. And
Yeah, he's
something
consolidate.
crazy breaks out. Let's blame the Kurds. Do something to the Kurds.
That's right. So
Oh Lord. So that's what we got. Do you have any closing thoughts?
I think I've talked myself out of a job for the evening.
Okay. Well, we appreciate all you folks taking the time to listen. We'll be back sometime next week or a couple weeks, or we could have a nuclear deal with Iran, and I know when that happens, we're gonna have plenty to say about that.
And
So,
pray for the peace of Jerusalem.
amen to that. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and especially with the spring feasts coming up, and the events in and around God's feast weeks in the spring and the fall have become more intense. And we are literally watching birth pangs take place. And, 10, 15 years ago, it used to be one event, and this is a big deal. This happened on God's appointed feast days. Well, now you can see some of these things coming. And, um, and it just gets more and more. And we're starting to see some real ripple effects and knock-on effects with the war in Ukraine, how it's going to affect food prices, distribution. We got the same thing taking place in China. I mean, it's happening. It's becoming a more and more global phenomenon. So, and with that, I'll close this out. Appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. We'll be back with you whenever. Again, it's the Watchmen, a couple of dudes just sitting on the wall watching the world go by. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Bye.